since the agreed framework was put together in 1994, and he particularly chastises the Bush administration for failing to understand what North Korea was trying to achieve. And I'm curious the extent to which I know North Korea feels they've been aggrieved. Part of it is we didn't build the 2 nuclear power plants and those kind of things. But curious, from the perspective, it's now 20 years down the road, where are they? I wonder, do you think North Korea believes it doesn't have the ability to put a warhead over the United States when it has now put 2 satellites over the United States, including one right over the Super Bowl? Second, a surreptitious attack from a submarine or a freighter in which it is not easily identifiable in terms of who did it means that the deterrent equation, like an EMP attack from a freighter, kind of goes away. And I'm curious what you think, whether the EMP Commission, in a very lengthy explanation, said that the Russians had given and the Chinese had given the North Koreans very significant help in developing EMP capabilities. And so that to me is very critical. The next thing is, to what extent does the missile defenses, whether it's THAAD or Aegis or ground-based interceptors deployed in Caucus, have an impact on the North Koreans? How do they, because I know what the rhetoric is. I always find it fascinating. The Chinese are really upset. They've frozen all military-to-military relations with South Korea over the deployment of THAAD. But if they're interested in stability in the region, which is what we always hear they are, why would they want to give North Korea an unimpeded shot with whether a nuclear-armed or non-nuclear armed weapon? The THAAD doesn't have any impact on the Chinese strategic systems. They know it, but they don't say so. But I'm curious the extent to which what do you think internally North Korea, when they see, if they saw robust, not only the State Department said, hey, let's get this thing done as soon as possible and get going. And finally, my friend Mike Dunn was my boss at NDU and my boss at AFA. And he made a point in interviewing the former tutor, Kim Jong-il, in Seoul, and asked him why he thought the North Koreans had nuclear weapons. And the individual was quite shocked, said, well, don't you understand? And General Dunn said, well, tell me from your perspective, as having been someone very close to it, being a defector, why? And he said, well, it's very true. They want to see the United States military withdraw from the Peninsula. Then they will use their nuclear forces as a means of deterring the United States from coming back to defend South Korea, should the North Koreans decide at that time to reunify the peninsula with force, which this gentleman said he thought was their goal. And I'm curious, does North Korea still believe that? Because I think that explains, it's not just the exercises they wanted and splitting the North Korea, the ROC and US alliance, but I think their fundamental objective is, and they say that often in a lot of communiques and a lot of statements, always kind of at the end. And of course, the United States bandits should withdraw their military forces from the peninsula.
Okay, Peter, that was at least 7 questions.
Well, you're right. I miscounted.
And
one was 6.
I scrupulously avoided taking notes. So among them, I'm going to skip around here because that's the way my mind works, and you just cue me on the ones I've missed. So one of the first questions went to the Chinese calculation. I don't have any special insight to that calculation these days, other than the evidence, which a number of people have written about, that the Chinese, one of the reasons, if not the chief reason, for the sanctions that have been applied to the DPRK not having the impact, causing the pain that sanctions advocates might want, is because the Chinese have not allowed those sanctions to work, and indeed have provided the means by which the sanctions can be circumvented. And if any of you have been to the DPRK recently, I have never been, but for some reason people think it's very useful to send me an email when they come back and tell me what they've seen. So the last bunch of these emails describe a capital city that is unlike what it's looked like before, which is to say that there is traffic, there are restaurants, there are construction cranes. It is looking like almost any other Asian city from 30,000 feet. Now, is it the only place in the DPRK that appears to be thriving? The proposition is not the only place, but maybe the principal place. This would not all be possible without Beijing. So I take from that we have work to do in Beijing. Even if you take my view that there's a limit to what we can accomplish, there's still work to be done. The second question I thought was the one that went to, do the Chinese view the DPRK's military capability, and maybe particularly its nuclear weapons capability, as part of its own modernization? And I would say absolutely not. I think that if the DPRK could wave a magic wand and have if the Chinese could wave a magic wand and have the DPRK's nuclear weapons program disappear from the planet, they would wave that wand. That program is a potential source of catastrophe for the Chinese, because it could end up bringing the United States of America and its military and naval forces right to its doorstep, the last thing the Chinese want. So, and if you look at the rationale as the Chinese have offered for their modernization program, both for the Blue Water Navy, for what they've done with their strategic systems, the increase in numbers, increase in mobility, this has got nothing, in my view, to do with the DPRK, really. It has everything to do with, ironically, the American de-emphasis on nuclear weapons that we've asserted, but in favor of conventional forces. Both our conventional prompt global strike and our multi-layered, as they see it, ballistic missile defense, which goes to another one of your points, and that is, what are the Chinese worried about? They're worried about our radars to begin with. They understand that the system is limited. They may think it is less limited than we claim it is, against sophisticated intercontinental ballistic missiles that have re-entry speeds of the kind that they will have, and have PEN-8s and have multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles, etc. But they're still worried that this is a system that can be upgraded, and they have a sense of comparable worry to the Russian worry about what's happening in Europe. And they don't take any comfort in hearing President Obama talk about the de-emphasis on nuclear weapons, because they look at the words surrounding conventional prompt global strike, forgetting that we actually don't have the capability, and they worry about the viability of their strategic systems, particularly when combined with our ballistic missile defense, because this puts at risk their deterrent, their second strike capability. And for me, it explains a lot of what the Chinese are about, and how they could have, if you pardon this expression, the chutzpah to complain to us about offering ballistic missile defense to our ally after the DPRK launches a ballistic missile. I mean, instead of complaining to us about that, they might use their influence in Pyongyang so there will be fewer missile tests. But be that as it may. The idea that the pulse from a nuclear weapon is something that the DPRK is interested in is actually not something I've thought about. But I don't think it figures prominently, and I would be surprised if EMP is high on the list of weapons effects that are in the minds of the technologists in the DPRK when they think about their nuclear weapons. I just don't think that's what they're about. It may be something we want to be interested in, but I don't think that's on their list. When it comes to the deterrent calculations in getting the United States off the peninsula, I want to say, if I wasn't clear in my remarks, that I don't believe that American political decision makers in the past or in the future will be deterred from executing their alliance responsibilities because the DPRK has nuclear weapons. The question about whether it could deliver nuclear weapons now with its MRBM capability to the Republic of Korea and Japan, let's, for the sake of discussion here this afternoon, stipulate, as lawyers like to say, that they can. I think that we, the United States of America, will not be dissuaded from executing our alliance responsibilities, and I would want every bit of signaling that we could to go to the Pyongyang so that they don't misconstrue, and that's what I was really talking about. They're misconstruing the effectiveness and what they could accomplish with nuclear weapons. Y'all may remember that when we first had nuclear weapons in the early 50s, we had delusions of grandeur too. We had massive retaliation enunciated by John Forster Dulles with the thought that we could deter everything with these nuclear weapons. Well, it turned out we couldn't. And they still don't serve all purposes because they're not credible. Might they be credible if we were launching regime change against the DPRK? Yes, they might. But my point was, at levels lower than that, they're not credible. Not to us. But the question is, what do they think? And I don't know. Okay.
Ambassador Bellucci gave everyone a lot of food for thought. I have noted your comment on points 2, 4, 6, and 3. So I will try to be brief in terms of my comments and also a couple of questions. Now, Ambassador Bellucci correctly stated that North Korea has borne a major responsibility for what he described as a failure of engagement with the United States. That is correct. But I would add the caveat that the United States also bears some of the responsibilities for failure to realize U.S. objectives in negotiations. We have been unsmart in many instances in how we have negotiated with the DPRK. A naive assumption going back to the 1990s behind our negotiating strategy, that North Korea would soon collapse or that there would soon be regime change. Listening too much to the Chinese, when the Chinese would advise us to ease off on ensuring that the North Koreans comply with the agreements they have made with us, 2005, 2007. Going into negotiations with the North and agreeing to 2 unwritten handshake agreements, October 2008 and February 2012. How naive can you get when you make a handshake agreement, unwritten, with the North Koreans, which of course they disavowed any knowledge of within a few weeks after our diplomats told us they had made these handshake agreements. So there is some blame to go around, and there are some other mistakes we have made as well. Now, I want to comment on the preemptive strike issue, because this is being talked about in both the U.S. and South Korea. I'm not advocating a preemptive strike, but I will say this. The time, if you're going to do it, for a preemptive strike is probably now, and within the next year or so. A strike against their nuclear and missile test facilities, to put those out of action and to buy us much greater time before the North could achieve that ICBM nuclear warhead capability. The situation that Ambassador Gallucci describes, I don't believe, if it came about, would prevent North Korea, after a U.S. preemptive strike, from hitting us back with nuclear weapons. Because frankly, I think at a time when we would pick up perhaps legitimate perceptions that they were going to strike us with nuclear weapons, when that time comes, the North is going to have multiple delivery systems, both on land and at sea, that no preemptive strike would be able to take out. And a preemptive strike under those circumstances also means an all-out war. You're going to accomplish nothing by hitting just a couple of command and control centers in a preemptive strike. The stakes are much, much higher than that. Now, these are my questions, and this is about the sanctions issue. And generally, it's along the lines that Ambassador Gallucci has laid out with regard to China.